Sit back, relax, and welcome to Reading Hours. Today's book is Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. Please let us know in the comments from where you are watching, or if there is a book you want us to summarize in future. When Lady Chatterley's Lover was first privately published in 1928 in Italy, it sent ripples through the literary world, ripples that would grow into waves of controversy, censorship battles, and cultural conversation that would last for decades. Written by D.H. Lawrence during the last years of his life, this novel is far more than a provocative tale of adultery. It's a layered exploration of class conflict, the mechanization of modern life, human intimacy, and the enduring struggle between the mind and the body. Set in post-World War I England, the novel tells the story of Constance Chatterley, a young woman trapped in a sterile marriage with the emotionally distant, physically paralyzed aristocrat, Sir Clifford Chatterley. Through her journey of emotional awakening and physical desire, culminating in an affair with the working-class gamekeeper Oliver Mellors, Lawrence challenges not only the prudishness of Edwardian values, but also the very foundations of English social order. His prose pulses with earthiness, introspection, and raw humanity, seeking to reconnect a spiritually barren society with the primal forces of nature and passion. The book was famously banned for decades in multiple countries, including the United Kingdom and the United States, due to its explicit language and open depiction of sexuality. It wasn't until 1960 that Penguin Books won a landmark obscenity trial in the UK, securing the novel's publication and changing the literary censorship landscape forever. In that moment, Lady Chatterley's Lover transitioned from scandalous fiction to cultural milestone. Yet beneath its controversial surface lies a much deeper critique. Lawrence doesn't just defy sexual repression, he mourns the emotional and spiritual deadening brought on by industrialization, war, and rigid social hierarchies. Connie's desire is not just for pleasure, it's for connection, vitality, and authenticity in a world rapidly losing touch with all three. Now, as we dive into this intimate and challenging story, we'll trace Connie's evolution, the tensions of class and love, and the defiant voice Lawrence lends to those seeking more than what society allows. Let's begin. It began in the aftermath of war, not with celebration, but with a subtle withering of life, the kind that creeps in slowly, wrapping itself around the spirit like ivy over stone. Constance Reed, known more simply as Connie, was a woman of 23 when she married Clifford Chatterley in 1917. The war was still a thunder in the distance, shaking nations and shattering bodies. And Clifford, a handsome and aristocratic man, returned from it broken not in mind, but in body. A spinal injury had left him paralyzed from the waist down, a fact he bore with the cold decorum expected of his class. Yet beneath that stoic surface, something essential had been lost, not just his ability to walk, but something far more difficult to articulate, a severed connection between self and the living, physical world. The couple settled in Ragby Hall, a gloomy estate nestled in the Midlands. Its corridors echoed with old wealth, but none of the vitality that once built it. Connie, raised in a progressive, artistic household in Scotland, had been intellectually nourished by her father, Sir Malcolm Reed, and emotionally shaped by her sister Hilda. She had known freedom, discussion, and sensation, not luxury, but the thrill of engagement with life's ideas. And yet, in the early days of marriage, she had convinced herself that love could be made in the mind as much as the body, and that companionship was enough. But time, slow and steady, worked away at that belief. At Ragby, Clifford devoted himself to writing essays and building a literary reputation. He surrounded himself with intellectuals who treated the world like a chessboard of ideas, debating its problems in endless circles. Connie sat among them, always polite, always pleasant, yet increasingly removed. Their talk was dry, devoid of soul, and though she was clever enough to keep up, she found herself drifting. These men, including Clifford, seemed to her to live without blood in their veins, more theory than being. Her marriage became one of quiet performance. Clifford, though physically dependent, was fiercely proud. He refused to let his condition reduce his dignity. He employed servants to wheel him around the grounds, and with a determined ambition, he even took to motorized wheelchairs to traverse the estate. The countryside around Ragby was bleak. Coal mines dug into the land like open wounds, and the men who worked them passed silently through the nearby village, hunched and grim. Clifford, in his desire to assert control and meaning, invested himself in the local collieries, assuming the role of a paternalistic landlord with growing capitalist tendencies. For Connie, the weeks turned into months, then into years. Her body, young and vibrant, grew restless. At first it was subtle, a sense of grayness in her chest, a dull ache in her limbs, a fatigue of the soul. She wandered through the woods near Ragby for hours, sometimes with Clifford, more often alone. The isolation grew sharper. She watched her husband retreat further into intellectualism, speaking with passion only about writing, production, and the fate of the upper classes. There was no touch between them, no comfort, no desire. Clifford seemed content with a love that was cerebral, but Connie began to feel as if she were dissolving. Her vitality dimmed. She lost weight, lost color, lost the brightness that had once marked her youth. Hilda, ever protective, came to visit and was shocked by her sister's pallor. She insisted Connie take a rest cure abroad, and for a short time, Connie did travel, hoping that distance might bring clarity. She visited Venice and returned with a deeper sense of the gulf between what life could be and what it had become. Upon returning to Ragby, nothing had changed. If anything, the silence of the hall felt more profound. It was in this atmosphere of emptiness and internal longing that Connie first encountered Oliver Mellors, the new gamekeeper at the estate. At first, he was merely a presence on the fringes, a reserved man with a rough accent, a former officer who had served in India. There was something oddly composed about him, a kind of private dignity that defied both his social status and the typical behavior of servants. Connie noticed how he moved deliberate, almost graceful, with a quiet self-possession. He rarely spoke to her beyond what was required, and in that, he became more intriguing. Mellors lived in a small, secluded cottage on the estate, tending the grounds with the same care he offered his solitude. Clifford, who appreciated his reticence, trusted him. For Connie, who had grown sick of empty talk, Mellors' silence felt almost sacred. It was not ignorance that kept him quiet, it was a choice. He was a man with scars, that much was clear, and unlike the men in Clifford's drawing room, his scars had come from lived experience, not philosophical discomfort. One day, During her solitary wanderings, Connie found herself by the hut where Mellors kept his hens. She watched as he crouched to gather eggs, the sun filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows over his body. He did not notice her at first. There was something so fundamentally human about him in that moment, earthy, present, without pretense, that Connie felt a strange tightness in her chest. It wasn't yet desire, not fully. It was something more primal, recognition. The sense that here was a man who had not lost the thread connecting mind and body, who had not let the world deaden him. They spoke briefly, awkwardly, almost formally. Mellors was polite but distant, not deferent in the way most working men were expected to be with the lady of the house. Connie sensed that he was drawing a line, one that came not from servitude, but from a guarded pride. She didn't push, but she left that encounter changed. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt the faint stirrings of aliveness return. It was as though something dormant had stretched in her, like a muscle remembering how to move. And so, without planning to, she began to walk that way more often, not to spy or to intrude, but to feel the pull of that invisible current. She didn't yet know what she sought, only that her soul, so long adrift, had glimpsed something worth following. The days that followed seemed unchanged to anyone watching from the outside, but within Connie, a quiet shift had begun. The woods around Ragby, once simply a place to walk off her melancholy, began to draw her in like a secret world. The filtered light through the trees, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the scent of damp earth. They awakened something elemental in her, something forgotten. It wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about seeking something real. In the stillness of those woods, life throbbed with an authenticity missing from the cold, well-dressed rooms of Ragby Hall. She found herself passing by the gamekeeper's cottage more frequently, sometimes by design, sometimes by accident. When she saw Mellors, he was always at work, splitting wood, cleaning the henhouse, mending a fence, and always alone. He greeted her with a nod or a few words, his accent gruff but not unkind. There was a roughness to him, not just in speech or manner, but in a kind of inwardness that set him apart. He didn't perform, didn't seek approval. He simply was. Connie felt both drawn to and wary of that difference. Around Mellors, she wasn't expected to smile politely or engage in tedious conversation. He didn't ask her opinions on literature or economics, didn't prod her for cleverness. That silence between them, at first awkward, began to feel like a kind of respect. It gave space for presence. And perhaps most disarmingly, Mellors didn't look at her as Lady Chatterley, the baronet's wife. He looked at her as a woman, though even that awareness seemed restrained, held back by something deeper than social convention. It was as if he had built walls not of duty, but of survival. Back in the house, life resumed its mechanical rhythm. Clifford became more invested in his writing and in his colliery ventures. He had hired a nurse, Mrs. Bolton, a kind and attentive woman who tended to his physical needs with a careful blend of respect and care. Clifford welcomed her presence with surprising warmth. He began to confide in her, share his thoughts more freely than he did with his own wife. For Connie, this subtle shift was both a relief and a wound. She wasn't jealous of Mrs. Bolton in the traditional sense. There was no romance in that relationship, but the closeness they shared served as a mirror. It reflected how far Clifford and Connie had drifted from one another, how far they had been all along. The emotional gap, once bridgeable with politeness, now felt like a void. Clifford had no understanding of the dull ache growing in Connie, and if he noticed her restlessness at all, he mistook it for fatigue or boredom. His concern never reached the depths of her inner life. Instead, he suggested she involve herself more with the running of the estate, or perhaps take up charitable duties, as women of her position often did. But Connie felt as if she were being asked to embroider cushions on the deck of a sinking ship. The emptiness could not be patched over with small deeds. One afternoon, driven by restlessness more than intent, she wandered deeper into the woods than usual. A spring rain had fallen earlier, and the air was rich with the scent of pine and damp moss. She reached the clearing near the gamekeeper's hut and found Mellors standing shirtless in the light drizzle, washing himself in a tin basin beside the cottage. The sight struck her like a chord, pure, unadorned, and unself-conscious. He didn't see her at first, and for a long moment, she watched in stillness. There was no vanity in his body, no effort to impress or allure. Just a man alone in nature, existing in a way so unfiltered that it left her breathless. When he noticed her, he showed no embarrassment. He reached calmly for his shirt, his face impassive but not cold. Connie, suddenly aware of her own intrusion, muttered an apology and turned to leave. But Mellors stopped her with a quiet voice. No anger, just an acknowledgement that she was there, that she had seen him not as a servant, but as a human being in the fullness of his being. They exchanged a few words, little more than the weather and the woods, but something had changed between them. The boundaries had shifted, though neither of them named it aloud. In the days that followed, the memory of that moment stayed with Connie. It wasn't lust in the shallow sense, though desire stirred. It was something deeper, a longing for life, for warmth, for connection that wasn't filtered through rank or ritual. She thought about how Mellors moved, how he spoke sparingly but with purpose, how he seemed to inhabit his body rather than merely wear it. Around him, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel reduced to her role as wife, lady, ornament. She felt like a woman waking from a long winter. Clifford, oblivious to these stirrings, began to speak more of heirs. He believed, in his modern sensibility, that Connie might take a lover not for love or pleasure, but for practicality. It was possible, he reasoned, to arrange a child discreetly and raise it as his own, thereby securing the family line. The conversation, when he brought it up, was clinical. He framed it as a solution, a progressive idea suited to their situation. Connie listened in stunned silence, not at the suggestion itself, but at the coldness of it. Her body, her longing, reduced to function. And yet, even in her anger, she recognized the strange irony. Clifford, who was emotionally unavailable and physically incapacitated, was giving her permission to seek what she had already begun to feel elsewhere. But what he offered was a transaction, not an understanding. He saw her need as an inconvenience to be managed, not as a wound needing healing. Connie didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she returned again to the woods, to the place where her inner life had begun to flicker back into color. She found herself by Mellors' hut once more, drawn not by strategy or intention, but by instinct. He was outside, as always, working with the steady rhythm of someone accustomed to silence and self-reliance. When he saw her, he paused, not surprised, not inviting, but simply present. They spoke again, this time with fewer gaps. Mellors, sensing something in her, shared a bit more about his life, how he had married and divorced, how war had left him disillusioned, how society's rules often felt like cages. Connie listened, and in that listening, she felt her own thoughts find shape. Here was someone who understood the ache of being misfit in a world that worshipped progress, but forgot how to feel. Here was someone who had not buried himself in pride or pity, but who bore his pain like a coat he could still walk in. Their conversations remained brief, but resonant, the kind that lingered long after they ended. Something was gathering between them, like the pressure before a summer storm, not yet declared, but unmistakable. And Connie, still unsure of where it would lead, no longer turned away from that feeling. She let it grow quietly, like roots reaching toward water in the dark. The spring deepened into a lush, enveloping season. Leaves thickened on the branches, flowers unfolded in quiet bursts, and the woods seemed to pulse with a rhythm older than time. Connie walked more frequently now, not out of boredom, but because the world outside Ragby had begun to speak to her in a language she had nearly forgotten. One of breath and pulse, of earth and scent, and slow, urgent aliveness. Each step she took into the forest was a step away from the stagnant, porcelain life she shared with Clifford, and a step closer to something unnamed but powerfully felt. At the center of that pull was Mellors. Their meetings grew less incidental and more inevitable, though neither of them said so aloud. There was an unspoken understanding forming between them, a mutual recognition not of class or status, but of something far more raw, loneliness. Not the performative loneliness of those surrounded by attention, but untouched, like Clifford, but the kind of solitude born from exile, emotional exile, sexual exile, the exile of being seen as less than whole. One afternoon, the air thick with the scent of bluebells and wet bark, Connie approached Mellors' cottage again. This time, he invited her inside. The space was spare and practical: wooden table, plain shelves, a kettle steaming gently on a stove, but it was unmistakably his. Books lined one wall, not many, but well worn, their spines softened by use. A few animal traps hung on the far end, and there was a neatness to the place, the kind that comes not from vanity, but from order born of necessity. He offered her tea, and she accepted, sitting in a simple chair, her coat still damp from a passing mist. They spoke of small things, birds nesting nearby, the stubbornness of foxes, the difficulty of keeping hens from wandering. But beneath the conversation was a current they both felt. Connie found herself watching the movement of Mellors' hands, the quiet grace with which he performed ordinary tasks. There was an intimacy in his simplicity, a dignity in his isolation. He spoke little of himself, but when he did, his words landed with weight. He had been to India with the army. He had returned a stranger to his own land. He had once believed in things: duty, honor, marriage, and had seen them all unravel. Connie listened, not just with her ears, but with her entire being. His voice was not polished, not elegant, but it was true. And more than the words, she noticed the spaces between them, the way he hesitated before speaking of his past, the way his eyes shifted toward the window, as if looking out for memories that might not wish to be recalled. He had been broken and rebuilt, not by choice, but by experience. And what remained was a man who no longer sought to please the world. She found in herself a strange trembling, a sense of exposure, not because of anything he said, but because of the strange comfort she felt in his presence. He wasn't trying to fix her or impress her. He wasn't asking her to perform any role. She could simply be. That small mercy, being allowed to exist without explanation, felt revolutionary. When she rose to leave, their eyes met with a silence more expressive than speech. It was the kind of look that reaches not across the surface, but straight into the marrow of being. Mellors did not touch her, and she did not step closer, but something passed between them, an understanding that the boundary they had both respected was not much longer to be maintained. Neither of them acknowledged it, but it lingered in the air like smoke from a fire not yet visible. Back at Ragby, the house pressed in on her with new weight. Clifford, immersed in the mechanics of industrial expansion, spoke increasingly of machines, of efficiency, of the future as something to be engineered. He was animated in his way, his eyes bright when discussing motors or new types of coal-cutting equipment. But when Connie tried to engage him on anything of the soul, feeling, nature, even just silence, he grew dismissive. He didn't understand what she meant when she said she felt stifled. He thought she was just being idle, or worse, ungrateful. Mrs. Bolton, now a fixture in Clifford's daily life, began to note Connie's absences. Her tone was never accusing, but laced with suggestion. Women of their class, she hinted, should be careful of wandering too far unaccompanied. There were dangers in the woods, not just physical, but reputational. Connie listened, but inwardly dismissed her. What reputation was left to protect, she wondered, when the very fabric of her inner life had grown so tattered? What danger could the outside world possibly pose that was worse than the slow, civil death within Ragby's walls? Her dreams became more vivid. At night, she imagined walking barefoot through the forest, the ground soft and cool, Mellors' hand in hers, not in passion, but in shared stillness. The hunger in her was no longer just physical. It was a yearning for truth, for flesh and breath, yes, but also for tenderness unshackled from duty. It was not just the body that ached, but the soul that longed to be witnessed. Their next meeting came without planning. She arrived at the cottage to find Mellors chopping wood. He looked up, brushed sweat from his brow, and smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that caught her off balance. There was no pretense, no defensiveness, only warmth, and the quiet kind of welcome one gives to someone who has already crossed an unseen threshold. They spoke little that afternoon, but the silence between them was fertile. She helped him carry logs inside. They drank tea again. She asked about his life before Ragby, and this time he spoke more freely about the cruelty of the war, about the silence of returning home to a world that had moved on, about the bitterness of marriage gone wrong. He spoke not with resentment, but with weariness. And Connie, listening, felt something open within her, not pity, not rescue, but recognition. She too had lived in a marriage of misapprehension, had borne the weight of being unseen. As dusk fell and she stood to leave, Mellors stepped closer, not urgently, not demandingly, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had waited long to speak without words. She didn't flinch. Their hands met briefly, barely more than a touch, but in that moment, something irreversible passed between them, not possession, not declaration, but an invitation to life. She left the cottage in twilight, the world glowing gold and blue. The woods seemed to hold their breath, and so did she. Something had begun, not in haste, but in slow, rooted certainty. And though she could not yet name it, she knew that whatever lay ahead, it would not be built on lies. The days lengthened, and with them, the fragile thread that connected Connie and Mellors stretched taut with new tension and promise. each meeting, though still carefully guarded, grew in significance. It was no longer about chance encounters or polite conversation. It was about discovery of selves, of bodies, and of a shared longing that neither had dared fully acknowledge before. The forest around them became a sanctuary, a place where the rules of society, rank, and expectation faded into the background, replaced by something far more elemental. Connie found herself thinking of Mellors constantly. Not just his rough hands, his quiet eyes, or the way his voice seemed to lower in the open air, but the freedom he embodied, the freedom to be authentic, flawed, and alive. She had spent so many years in a gilded cage, where the polished surfaces of Ragby Manor and the cold intellect of her husband had demanded a performance of perfection. Mellors, with his scars and simplicity, was a revelation. He offered no pretense, only honesty, and it unsettled her in the most profound way. One morning, the air still crisp with early spring chill, Connie made her way to the edge of the woods earlier than usual. She found Mellors already at work, clearing brush near a small stream. He looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a steadiness that invited trust. They fell into easy conversation, the kind that had become rare in Connie's life. She spoke of the growing restlessness she felt, the hollow ache that had nothing to do with material comforts or social standing. Mellors listened without interruption, his presence a balm to the storm of her thoughts. He did not offer solutions, he merely held space for her to speak her truth. As the day wore on, the boundaries between them dissolved further. The warmth of the sun coaxed them out of their hesitation. Their hands brushed while gathering wildflowers, and neither pulled away. The physical closeness was new and electrifying, awakening a sense of desire that Connie had long repressed beneath layers of duty and decorum. She was aware of the risks, the gossip that could arise, the scandal that would surely follow if their affair was discovered. Yet the risk seemed secondary, almost irrelevant, compared to the profound need to feel alive, to be seen and touched with sincerity. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. One afternoon, as the light softened and shadows lengthened, they found themselves beside the stream, the water murmuring quietly over smooth stones. Mellors broke the silence first, his voice low and steady. He spoke of his own loneliness, the ways in which he had been cast aside by the world he once knew. The war had taken more than his youth. It had severed his connection to the life he might have led. Yet in meeting her, he confessed, he felt something reawakened within him, a flicker of hope. Connie felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep recognition of their shared pain. Here was a man who, like her, was searching for a place to belong, a way to live fully despite the wounds of the past. Their conversation turned to love, not the sanitized, distant love of novels or society's expectations, but the messy, urgent love born of flesh and spirit intertwined. Mellors' words were simple but profound, and Connie found herself drawn to the raw truth they contained. She realized that this was what she had been missing, a love that did not demand conformity or sacrifice of self, but embraced all of her complexities. As twilight fell, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, Mellors reached for her hand. This time, Connie did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the contact igniting a spark that ran through her entire body. The moment was fragile and charged, like the pause before a storm, filled with the promise of something irrevocable. They sat in companionable silence, the forest around them alive with the sounds of night. Connie felt a peace she had never known, as if the world had narrowed down to this single moment of connection. When she finally left the woods that evening, the weight of what had begun settled firmly inside her. She was no longer the passive wife drifting through days of quiet desperation. She was a woman awakening to her own desires and truths, ready to claim a part of herself that had long been denied. Back at Ragby Manor, the contrast was stark. Clifford's world remained rigid and unyielding. His preoccupation with work and status seemed increasingly alien to her. She noticed how he barely looked at her anymore, how their conversations grew shorter, more perfunctory. The marriage they shared was a shell, maintained by habit and societal expectation rather than any real connection. Mrs. Bolton's presence was more insistent now. Her careful observations, the sly remarks about propriety and duty, served as constant reminders of the constraints Connie faced. Yet Connie no longer felt the same resignation. There was a growing fire inside her, a determination to break free from the roles imposed upon her. Her visits to Mellors became more frequent and less cautious. She began to anticipate their meetings with a mix of excitement and nervousness, the emotions mingling in a heady blend. Each encounter deepened their bond, revealing new layers of vulnerability and strength. One afternoon, as rain began to fall softly, they took refuge in Mellors' cottage. The small space, warmed by the stove's glow, felt intimate and safe. They spoke of dreams and disappointments, of the harsh realities that had shaped their lives. Mellors shared memories of his childhood, of the freedom he once knew before circumstances and choices had altered his path. Connie listened, captivated by the man behind the rugged exterior. Their hands found each other again, this time lingering longer. The physical barrier between them, the social chasm of class and convention, seemed to blur in the warmth of shared understanding. The boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared permeable, inviting exploration. As the rain pattered against the windows, their conversation gave way to silence, and then to tentative touches. It was a delicate dance, a negotiation of trust and desire. Connie felt a flood of sensations, fear, anticipation, longing, each one mingling with the next until they formed a powerful current. She was learning to reclaim her body, to understand the language it spoke when freed from restraint. Mellors was patient, respectful, attuned to her rhythms and hesitations. Their connection was not merely physical. It was a communion of souls, a meeting of two beings seeking wholeness. When they finally parted that evening, the world outside felt different, more vivid, more alive. Connie carried with her a newfound sense of possibility, a hope that life could be more than the hollow existence she had known. Yet, beneath the joy and awakening, there remained an undercurrent of uncertainty. The reality of their situation, divided by class, bound by convention, was a shadow that loomed over every stolen moment. They both understood the precariousness of what they shared, the dangers it entailed. But for now, in the sanctuary of the woods and the quiet intimacy of Mellors' cottage, those worries receded. There was only the present and the tender unfolding of a love that dared to defy expectation. This awakening was not just about passion or rebellion. It was a reclamation of self, a breaking of chains forged by society and circumstance. Connie was beginning to see that true freedom was found not in privilege or position, but in the courage to live authentically, to embrace desire without shame, and to seek connection beyond the walls that divide. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with obstacles both internal and external. But in Mellors, she had found a mirror, a companion, and a spark. Together, they had begun to write a new story, one of hope, of awakening, and of love that transcended boundaries. As the seasons shifted, so too did the nature of the connection between Connie and Mellors deepen, evolving beyond fleeting encounters into something that stirred the very fabric of their beings. It was no longer just an escape or a secret indulgence, but a profound transformation, a collision of worlds that had been kept apart by the rigid divisions of class and expectation. Their love, at once tender and fierce, challenged everything they had known about themselves and the lives they were expected to lead. Connie found herself increasingly aware of the emptiness that had pervaded her marriage with Clifford. The physical distance between them was mirrored by an emotional gulf that grew with each passing day. Clifford's preoccupation with his intellectual pursuits and his detachment from the realities of the world left her isolated and lonely. Their conversations, when they happened, were stilted and superficial, lacking the warmth or connection that Connie craved. She realized that their marriage had become a prison of silence and misunderstanding, a union maintained more out of obligation than love. In contrast, Mellors offered something raw and real, a connection that reached beyond words and titles. His life, shaped by toil and hardship, was marked by an honesty that was both grounding and exhilarating. Connie was drawn to his strength, his sensitivity, and the quiet dignity with which he carried himself despite the social limitations imposed upon him. He saw her not as a Lady Chatterley, an aristocrat bound by convention, but simply as Connie, complex, yearning, alive. Their meetings became a refuge from the suffocating expectations of society. In the secluded woods and the modest cottage that Mellors called home, they could shed the masks required by their respective worlds. Here, there was no judgment, no hierarchy, only two souls reaching out to each other in search of understanding and belonging. One afternoon, as they sat beside a small fire in the cottage's hearth, Mellors spoke candidly about his fears and hopes. The war, with all its brutality and loss, had left him scarred, not just physically, but emotionally. He had returned to a world that seemed indifferent to his pain, where his place was uncertain. Yet meeting Connie had reignited something within him, a flicker of possibility that life could hold more than struggle and solitude. Connie listened intently, recognizing in his story echoes of her own dissatisfaction and longing. The more they shared, the more they saw how their disparate lives were bound by similar desires, the need for connection, for freedom, for authenticity. Their love was not a mere dalliance, but a meeting of equals, a challenge to the rigid structures that sought to define them. Yet the reality of their situation was never far away. The social chasms that separated them were vast and deep, maintained by unspoken rules and harsh judgments. The thought of discovery brought a sharp pang of fear to Connie's heart. She knew that if their relationship were exposed, the consequences would be severe, not just for her, but for Mellors as well. The scandal could ruin reputations, destroy livelihoods, and shatter the fragile peace they had carved out. Despite these risks, Connie's resolve grew stronger. She was no longer content to live a half-life, bound by the chains of propriety and silence. The love she had found with Mellors demanded courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the truths that society sought to suppress. she began to see that true happiness required more than comfort or security. It required the freedom to be oneself, fully and without apology. Their physical intimacy, once tentative and shy, blossomed into a profound expression of their emotional bond. In each touch, each kiss, they communicated what words could not capture: the depth of their desire, the tenderness of their care, the fierce joy of being truly seen and accepted. The boundaries of class and convention blurred in the heat of their passion, revealing a landscape where love was the only law. Connie's awakening was not without its inner turmoil. She struggled with guilt and confusion, torn between the expectations ingrained by her upbringing and the new truths she was discovering. The polished veneer of Ragby Manor and the cold rationality of her husband's world seemed increasingly distant and hollow compared to the vibrant reality she experienced with Mellors. At times, she found herself caught between two worlds, unsure of where she belonged or what path to choose. The tension between duty and desire, tradition and freedom, threatened to overwhelm her. Yet through it all, the love she shared with Mellors remained a guiding light, a source of strength and hope. Their conversations often turned to the future, a subject both thrilling and daunting. They dared to dream of a life where their love could exist openly, without fear or shame. But the obstacles were formidable: the rigid class distinctions, the judgment of society, the entrenched roles they had been assigned since birth. Yet even as the path ahead seemed uncertain, they clung to the belief that love could transcend these barriers. Connie began to reclaim parts of herself that had long been suppressed. She found joy in simple pleasures: the feel of soil beneath her fingers, the scent of wildflowers in the air, the quiet moments of connection with Mellors. These experiences grounded her, reminding her of the richness of life beyond the constraints of titles and wealth. Meanwhile, Mellors revealed new facets of his character: his intelligence, his humor, his capacity for tenderness. The rough exterior gave way to a man of depth and complexity, capable of profound love and understanding. Connie saw in him a partner who respected her mind as much as her body, who valued her as a whole person rather than a social symbol. Their relationship became a quiet rebellion, a defiance of the norms that sought to confine them. It was a testament to the power of love to break down walls and heal wounds, to create new possibilities where none seemed to exist. In each other, they found not only passion, but redemption and renewal. Yet the shadow of the outside world remained. Mrs. Bolton, ever watchful, continued to represent the unyielding grip of convention. Her presence was a reminder that the delicate balance they maintained could be shattered at any moment. The threat of exposure was a constant tension underlying their stolen moments of bliss. Connie's transformation did not go unnoticed by those around her. Subtle changes in her demeanor, the glimmer of something unspoken in her eyes, hinted at a new confidence and vitality. While she continued to fulfill her societal role outwardly, there was an undeniable shift beneath the surface, a woman reclaiming her power and voice. The unfolding of their love story was not just a personal journey, but a challenge to the world they inhabited. It raised questions about the nature of freedom, the constraints of class, and the possibility of true equality in love. Through their relationship, Connie and Mellors embodied the tensions and contradictions of a changing society, where old structures clashed with new desires. As spring gave way to summer, the intensity of their bond only grew. Each meeting, each touch, Each shared secret wove them closer together. They were no longer merely lovers in hiding, but two people forging a path toward a new way of being, one defined by honesty, passion, and courage. The forest remained their sanctuary, a place where time seemed to stand still, and the burdens of the outside world melted away. In the dappled light filtering through the leaves, they found a refuge for their love, a space where their souls could intertwine freely. Yet, with every stolen moment, the stakes grew higher. The world beyond the trees remained unforgiving, and the consequences of discovery loomed like a dark cloud. They were acutely aware that their love, while beautiful and transformative, was also fragile and vulnerable. But neither was willing to turn back. The promise of a life lived fully, authentically, was worth the risks. In each other, they had found a truth that could not be denied, a love that transcended class, expectation, and fear. Their journey was only beginning, and the road ahead would test their resolve and strength. But for now, in the quiet intimacy of the woods and the warmth of Mellors' cottage, they allowed themselves to dream of freedom, of connection, and of a love that dared to defy the world. As their affair progressed, Connie and Mellors found themselves more deeply entwined, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Their love was no longer a secret merely hidden away in stolen moments, but a force that reshaped their understanding of themselves and their places in the world. The boundaries that once defined their lives, class, duty, expectation, began to dissolve in the face of their growing intimacy. Connie's transformation was remarkable. She who had once moved through life with the careful detachment of a woman shaped by privilege and societal norms, now radiated a vibrant energy born of authentic passion. The stifling loneliness that had haunted her in Ragby Manor was replaced by a fierce vitality, as though the act of loving Mellors had awakened something long dormant within her. Each meeting with him rekindled her senses, her sight, touch, hearing, even her very breath seemed heightened, attuned to the natural world that surrounded them. Mellors, too, was changed by their connection. His rough exterior, shaped by years of hard labor and the bitterness of war, softened in Connie's presence. She saw the man beneath the surface complex, intelligent, vulnerable, far from the stereotype of the stoic gamekeeper. Their conversations delved into books, art, and the politics of their time, revealing a man whose mind was as keen as his body was strong. They challenged each other's ideas and beliefs, forging a relationship not simply of desire, but of respect and intellectual companionship. Yet, this union was not without its complications. The social gulf between them loomed large, a chasm difficult to bridge even with their love as a bridge. The expectations placed on Connie as a member of the landed gentry were suffocating. She was a lady, after all, meant to embody grace, restraint, and decorum. Her affair with Mellors was a rebellion not only against her husband, but against the entire social order that kept them apart. The contrast between Clifford and Mellors became increasingly stark in Connie's eyes. Clifford, absorbed in his abstract intellectual pursuits and the management of Ragby's estate, seemed to inhabit a different world altogether. His injuries from the war had left him physically incapacitated, but it was his emotional detachment that weighed most heavily on Connie. He was distant and cold, embodying a rigid ideal of manhood that left no room for vulnerability or passion. The intimacy she craved was absent, replaced by an unspoken barrier that grew wider with each passing day. Mellors, by contrast, was alive in every sense of the word, his hands rough, but capable of tenderness, his eyes full of unspoken understanding. He represented a world of physicality and honesty, a stark counterpoint to the sterile, intellectual life Connie inhabited with Clifford. In Mellors's presence, she rediscovered her own body and desires, confronting the shame and repression that had shadowed her marriage. Their encounters became a kind of sanctuary, a place where social hierarchies ceased to exist. In the woods, among the trees and wildlife, Connie felt herself stripped of the trappings of class and expectation. Here, she was simply a woman loving a man, not a titled lady maintaining a facade. The natural world reflected their relationship, wild, untamed, and free from artificial constraints. Despite this, the threat of discovery always lingered. Mrs. Bolton, the ever-watchful housekeeper, symbolized the unyielding grip of societal norms. Her suspicion and disapproval reminded Connie that the safety of their secret was fragile. The world outside the woods was unforgiving, and scandal could bring ruin. Yet, Connie was no longer willing to hide or deny her feelings. The risks only underscored the urgency and authenticity of their love. As their relationship matured, Connie began to question the very foundations of her existence. She challenged the values she had been taught, the roles she was expected to play. Her rebellion was not merely sexual, but deeply philosophical. She saw the hypocrisy and cruelty in a society that prized wealth and status over genuine human connection. The barriers of class were arbitrary walls designed to divide and control, rather than reflect any true difference in worth. Mellors shared these sentiments, shaped by his own experiences of class prejudice and hardship. His life had been one of labor and survival, far removed from the luxuries of Ragby Manor. Yet he possessed a dignity and wisdom that transcended social rank. Their love became a symbol of possibility, proof that human beings could connect deeply despite the divisions imposed by birth or circumstance. In this light, their affair was revolutionary, a quiet but profound act of defiance. Connie's growing assertiveness and Mellors's unyielding loyalty challenged the established order. Their story became a meditation on freedom to love, to express desire, to live authentically without shame or constraint. Connie also became acutely aware of her own privilege and the limitations of her upbringing. She recognized that many women of her class were trapped in loveless marriages, their desires suppressed for the sake of propriety. Her affair with Mellors was not just an escape, but a statement, an assertion that love and passion were not the sole province of any one class. She began to see herself not as a passive victim of circumstance, but as an agent of change. Their conversations often touched on the nature of love itself, its power to heal and transform, to break down barriers and open new horizons. Connie and Mellors understood that their relationship was rare and fragile, yet its very rarity made it precious. They were bound together not by convenience or duty, but by an urgent, undeniable need to be fully known and accepted. Yet, even in the midst of their passion, moments of doubt and fear surfaced. Connie worried about the future. How long could this secret last? What would happen if they were found out? Could their love survive the harsh scrutiny of the outside world? These fears, however, did not diminish their commitment. If anything, they strengthened their resolve to live honestly and boldly. Meanwhile, life at Ragby continued with its rigid routines and cold formalities. Clifford's increasing detachment and physical decline created a backdrop of quiet despair. The contrast between the sterile atmosphere of the manor and the vibrant, wild world of the woods could not have been more stark. Connie's heart and mind were divided between these two realities, the life she was expected to maintain and the one she was forging with Mellors. Her interactions with other members of the upper class underscored the isolation she felt. Conversations at social gatherings felt hollow, filled with polite gossip and superficial concerns. Connie's thoughts often drifted back to the woods, to the warmth of Mellors's embrace, to the freedom she found there. The disparity between these worlds highlighted the constraints imposed by class and convention. In Mellors's company, Connie discovered a new sense of purpose. She began to question not only her own life, but the broader social order. Her love for Mellors was intertwined with a growing political awareness, a recognition that true freedom required the dismantling of oppressive structures. This awareness did not manifest as grand rhetoric, but as a quiet determination to live authentically and to challenge injustice in her own way. Their love became a refuge from a world that often seemed cruel and indifferent. Together, they created a space where vulnerability was met with compassion, where desire was celebrated rather than suppressed. This sanctuary was fragile but precious, a testament to the human capacity for connection and renewal. The natural world remained a constant presence in their relationship, a symbol of the life force that sustained them. The changing seasons, the rhythms of the earth, mirrored the cycles of their love, its growth, its challenges, its moments of stillness and renewal. Connie felt herself growing rooted, like the trees that surrounded them, drawing strength from the soil and sky. As their bond deepened, Connie's confidence and self-awareness flourished. She no longer saw herself as a passive participant in her own life, but as a woman capable of making choices and shaping her destiny. Mellors's unwavering support and respect nurtured this growth, creating a partnership based on equality and mutual care. The intensity of their love was a revelation, breaking through the layers of repression and disconnection that had marked their previous lives. It was not without pain or sacrifice, but it was real, alive, with the promise of freedom and fulfillment. Their story stood as a powerful challenge to the rigid class system and social mores of their time. Through their love, Connie and Mellors embodied the possibility of a world where human connection transcended status and convention, a world where passion, honesty, and courage could flourish. And yet, beneath the joy and hope, there remained a tension and awareness that the world beyond the woods was unforgiving, and that their love, as beautiful as it was, existed in a precarious balance. The future was uncertain, the risks high, but they faced it together, bound by a love that defied the odds. The seasons turned again, carrying with them a subtle shift in the rhythm of Connie and Mellors's relationship. Their passion, once marked by the raw intensity of stolen moments and clandestine meetings, began to mature into something more profound and enduring. As the physical intensity softened into a deeper emotional bond, Connie found herself confronting questions that reached beyond desire, stirring the very core of her identity and purpose. Their meetings in the woods remained a sacred refuge from the rigid constraints of the world beyond. The natural surroundings, towering trees, babbling brooks, open skies, seemed to reflect the openness and freedom they sought in their connection. Here, the barriers of class and expectation dissolved completely, and they existed simply as two souls seeking truth and intimacy. Yet, this sanctuary was no longer just a place to escape. It had become a site of transformation for both of them. Connie's thoughts wandered often to the stark contrast between her life at Ragby Manor and the world she inhabited with Mellors. The manor, with its cold grandeur and sterile formality, had once been a symbol of security and status. Now it felt like a prison, filled with hollow rituals and emotional barrenness. Clifford, increasingly absorbed in his intellectual pursuits and distant from his own body, seemed to inhabit a separate realm. His presence in the house was like a shadow, a reminder of the limitations imposed on her by marriage and society. Mellors, in contrast, embodied vitality and honesty. His rough hands and straightforward speech were a balm to her weary spirit. He was a man who had known hardship and labor, yet he carried himself with a quiet dignity that defied the social judgments imposed upon him. Their conversations, often unhurried and reflective, ranged from philosophy to poetry, revealing a shared hunger for meaning beyond the superficialities of class and convention. Connie's growing self-awareness was both exhilarating and unsettling. She felt the stirrings of a rebellion, not just against her husband or the social order, but against the parts of herself that had been shaped to conform and comply. The love she shared with Mellors was a catalyst, awakening her to a deeper truth about her own desires and potential. She began to see that her earlier life, marked by constraint and repression, was no longer a life she could accept. This awakening was not without its conflicts. Guilt and doubt sometimes shadowed her joy as the weight of societal expectations pressed down upon her. She worried about the consequences of their affair, not just for herself, but for those around her. The world outside the woods was harsh and unforgiving, and scandal could bring ruin. Yet, these fears only seemed to deepen her resolve to live authentically. Clifford's condition continued to deteriorate, both physically and emotionally. The injuries he had sustained in the war left him crippled and unable to fully participate in the life of the manor. More than that, however, was his emotional withdrawal, an abyss of silence and detachment that Connie found increasingly unbearable. The intellectual pursuits that had once fascinated her now seemed cold and irrelevant, incapable of bridging the chasm between them. In her heart, Connie mourned the loss of the husband she had once hoped for, the man who might have shared her dreams and passions. But that man no longer existed. Instead, she found herself drawn irrevocably to Mellors, whose presence brought warmth and life to her days. Their love was a vivid contrast to the emptiness of her marriage, a living rebellion against the expectations that sought to bind her. The nature of their relationship evolved in subtle but profound ways. What had begun as a physical attraction blossomed into a partnership marked by mutual respect and deep emotional connection. Mellors was no longer simply a lover, but a confidant and companion, someone who saw Connie fully and accepted her without judgment. In turn, Connie came to understand Mellors's complexities, the fears, the hopes, the quiet strength that lay beneath his rugged exterior. Their discussions often touched on the limitations of their respective worlds. Mellors spoke candidly of the class divisions that shaped his life, of the injustices and hardships he had endured. Connie shared her frustrations with the stifling conventions of her social circle, the hollow rituals that masked the emptiness beneath. Together, they envisioned a world where love and freedom were not dictated by birth or wealth, but by genuine human connection. This shared vision was both inspiring and daunting. The reality of their circumstances was unyielding, and the possibility of lasting happiness seemed distant. Yet, the act of imagining something different gave them strength. Their love became a small but powerful rebellion against the structures that sought to confine them. Connie's growing independence was evident in her actions and demeanor. She began to challenge the expectations placed upon her with greater confidence, refusing to hide her feelings or submit silently to her husband's coldness. The awakening of her sexuality was entwined with a broader awakening of her spirit, a refusal to be defined solely by class or duty. Mellors, for his part, remained a steadfast presence, embodying a quiet strength that supported Connie's transformation. His own struggles with identity and belonging found solace in their union. Their love was a refuge from loneliness and alienation, a place where they could be fully themselves. Yet, the tension between their private world and the outside reality persisted. The danger of discovery loomed large, a constant reminder of the fragile nature of their happiness. Mrs. Bolton's watchful eyes and the gossip of servants underscored the risks they faced. The social order was not inclined to forgive or forget such transgressions, especially when they crossed the rigid boundaries of class. Connie's reflections often turned to the meaning of love itself. She saw it as a force that transcended social conventions, a power that could heal wounds and open new possibilities. Her love for Mellors was an affirmation of life, a rejection of the cold, mechanical existence she had known. It was a call to embrace desire, emotion, and connection as essential to the human experience. In the quiet moments they shared, beneath the canopy of the woods or beside the flickering firelight, Connie and Mellors spoke of hope and future. Though uncertain and fraught with challenges, their love was a beacon, illuminating a path beyond the confines of class and convention. It was a promise that, even in a world marked by division and repression, authentic connection was possible. The natural world remained a powerful symbol throughout their journey. The cycles of the seasons mirrored their own emotional tides, times of growth, challenge, and renewal. Connie found herself more deeply attuned to the rhythms of the earth, sensing in the changing landscape a reflection of her own inner transformation. Their affair was no longer a mere escape, but a declaration of identity. Connie embraced the complexity of her desires and choices, rejecting the simplistic roles assigned to her by society. Mellors, too, found a new sense of purpose and belonging in their union. Yet, the future remained uncertain. The fragile balance of their relationship was vulnerable to the harsh realities beyond their secluded world. The looming presence of Clifford, the expectations of society, and the possibility of exposure cast long shadows over their happiness. Still, they faced these challenges with courage and determination, bound by a love that defied convention, and risked everything for the chance at true freedom. Their story was not only a tale of passion, but a profound exploration of what it meant to live authentically in a world that demanded conformity. In this, their love transcended the personal, becoming a symbol of resistance against the oppressive structures of class, gender, and expectation. It was a reminder that true connection could break down barriers and open new possibilities for the human heart. The tension that had quietly simmered beneath the surface of Connie and Mellors' relationship began to surface with increasing urgency. The fragile cocoon of their secret world, woven from stolen moments in the woods and whispered confidences, was threatened by forces both external and internal. Reality pressed against their secluded refuge, reminding them that their love existed not just in defiance of social convention, but at the edge of peril. Connie's life at Ragby Manor was increasingly defined by the duality of her existence. On one side lay the cold, formal world of her marriage, where she played the role expected of a lady of her class, aloof, composed, dutiful. On the other side was the wild, untamed world she shared with Mellors, alive with passion, honesty, and emotional depth. The contrast between these worlds became more stark with each passing day, forcing Connie to confront the growing chasm between her inner life and outward obligations. Clifford's physical and emotional decline weighed heavily on the household. His war wounds, once a symbol of sacrifice and heroism, had left him a broken man, crippled in body and distant in spirit. His withdrawal into a world of books and ideas, devoid of feeling and connection, created a hollow space in their marriage that no amount of etiquette or propriety could fill. Connie found herself burdened by a mixture of pity, frustration, and resentment. The man she had married, with his brilliant mind and gentle nature, seemed to have vanished beneath the weight of pain and isolation. Within this bleak atmosphere, Connie's relationship with Mellors was a lifeline. Yet, it was also a source of profound conflict. She wrestled with feelings of guilt and loyalty, torn between the conventions that bound her and the truth of her heart. The act of loving Mellors was not simply a matter of desire. It was a challenge to the very fabric of her world, a declaration that she would no longer live according to the rules imposed upon her by birth and circumstance. Their meetings took on a deeper intensity, marked by a combination of urgency and tenderness. Each encounter was both a refuge and a risk, a moment of profound connection shadowed by the possibility of discovery. The woods, once a sanctuary where time seemed to stand still, now felt charged with the weight of consequence. The rustling leaves and distant bird calls seemed to echo the unspoken tension between freedom and constraint. Mellors, too, grappled with the implications of their love. As a gamekeeper and a man of the working class, his world was defined by hard labor, social hierarchies, and limited prospects. His relationship with Connie challenged not only societal norms, but his own sense of identity. He was deeply aware of the gulf between their lives, the precariousness of their union in a society rigidly divided by class. Yet, his love for Connie was unwavering, rooted in a profound respect and admiration that transcended social boundaries. Their conversations increasingly revolved around the nature of freedom and fulfillment. Connie voiced her longing for a life that embraced the fullness of human experience, emotion, desire, creativity, rather than the narrow confines of duty and decorum. Mellors shared his own dreams and disappointments, speaking of a world where one's worth was not measured by birth or wealth, but by the integrity of one's character. This dialogue was transformative for Connie. She began to see her own desires not as fleeting indulgences, but as essential truths. Her love for Mellors was not a mere escape from the sterility of her marriage. It was a reclamation of her own agency and humanity. The awakening she experienced was both personal and political, a challenge to the rigid social order that sought to define her by class and gender. Yet, the reality of their situation remained harsh. The manor's walls, with their cold formality and watchful eyes, were a constant reminder of the boundaries they transgressed. Mrs. Bolton, the ever-vigilant housekeeper, embodied the unyielding expectations of the household, her presence a subtle but persistent threat to their secrecy. Gossip and suspicion lurked in the background, a reminder that their love was fragile and precarious. Connie's internal conflict deepened as she contemplated the consequences of their affair. The possibility of scandal loomed large, threatening not only her reputation but her sense of self. Yet, the thought of renouncing the love that had awakened her spirit was unbearable. She understood that to live without Mellors was to deny a fundamental part of herself. As autumn gave way to winter, the natural world around Ragby Manor mirrored the evolving emotional landscape. The bare trees and cold winds seemed to echo the stark realities they faced. Yet, beneath the surface, life pulsed with a quiet resilience. The cyclical nature of the seasons reminded Connie that transformation was both inevitable and necessary. In moments of solitude, she reflected on the nature of love and freedom. Love, she realized, was not simply an emotion or a social arrangement, but a force that could challenge and reshape the world. It was an act of courage to claim that love in the face of judgment and constraint. Freedom was not merely physical liberty, but the freedom to be true to oneself. Mellors shared these reflections, revealing a depth of feeling that transcended their physical passion. He spoke of his own journey towards self-acceptance, the struggles of belonging to a class that was often overlooked and marginalized. Their love became a meeting place of two worlds, a bridge across the divides of class and expectation. Their intimacy deepened not just in the physical sense, but in the sharing of fears, hopes, and dreams. The barriers between them eroded as they revealed their vulnerabilities and strengths. This openness forged a bond that was as much emotional and spiritual as it was physical. Yet, the practical challenges of their situation could not be ignored. The risk of discovery grew with each meeting, and the consequences would be dire. Connie understood that the outside world would never fully accept their union. The social order was too deeply entrenched, and the roles prescribed to her by birth and marriage were not easily cast aside. Despite this, she resolved to live authentically, to embrace the love that had given her life new meaning. Mellors, too, stood firm in his commitment, willing to face whatever hardships lay ahead. Their relationship became an act of defiance and hope, a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries. Connie's transformation was evident not only in her relationship with Mellors, but in her own self-perception. She no longer saw herself as a passive victim of circumstance, but as an active participant in her own destiny. Her awakening was a reclamation of her body, mind, and spirit, a rejection of the stifling roles imposed by society. Their story, set against the backdrop of a changing England, was a microcosm of broader social shifts. The old hierarchies were beginning to crumble, challenged by new ideas about class, gender, and individuality. Connie and Mellors' love embodied this shift, a personal rebellion that echoed larger struggles for freedom and equality. As winter's chill settled over the manor, their love burned brighter, a flame against the cold. It was a love that demanded courage and sacrifice, yet offered the promise of renewal and transformation. In each other, they found not only passion, but a sense of belonging and hope. The woods where they met became a sacred space, a place where love could flourish free from judgment and constraint. Here, beneath the sheltering branches, they dreamed of a future where love was not limited by class or convention, where they could live openly and fully. Their journey was far from over, fraught with uncertainty and challenge. Yet, the bond they had forged was strong, rooted in honesty and mutual respect. It was a love that defied the world's expectations, a love that sought not just to survive, but to thrive. In this, their story captured the essence of human longing, the desire for connection, freedom, and authenticity. It was a reminder that love, in its truest form, was a force of transformation, capable of breaking down walls and opening new possibilities. The fragile sanctuary that Connie and Mellors had built around their love was constantly under threat, not only from the social structures that confined them, but also from their own fears and doubts. The awareness of their precarious position pressed upon them with increasing weight, challenging the resolve that had sustained their passion through months of secrecy and quiet rebellion. In the cold light of reality, they found themselves confronting questions that went far beyond personal desire. What did their love mean in a world so sharply divided by class, tradition, and expectation? And how could they hope to claim a future together in defiance of these powerful forces? Connie's life at Ragby Manor was a complex tapestry woven with threads of duty, longing, and awakening. Her interactions with Clifford remained tinged with a mixture of obligation and sorrow. Though he was physically weakened and emotionally withdrawn, Clifford was still her husband, a symbol of a life defined by privilege and constraint. Their conversations were often formal and strained, revealing the gulf between them, one that neither love nor sympathy could bridge. Clifford's intellectual pursuits, while impressive, seemed detached from the raw realities of human connection, leaving Connie isolated in a marriage that felt more like a prison than a partnership. In stark contrast, Mellors represented a world that was immediate, tangible, and deeply rooted in the natural rhythms of life. His connection to the land, his physical strength, and his emotional honesty stood in sharp relief against the cold detachment of the upper-class environment. Their love was not just a meeting of bodies, but a merging of worlds, an intimate exchange that challenged the very foundations of social hierarchy. For Mellors, the relationship was a testament to his own worth beyond his class and occupation, a declaration that love and respect were not the sole preserve of the privileged. The months passed with an uneasy blend of passion and caution. Each encounter in the woods was both a gift and a risk, a reminder that their love was forbidden yet undeniable. They found solace in shared moments, walking through the autumnal landscape, watching the changing seasons, and speaking openly about their dreams and fears. These conversations deepened their bond, revealing not only their desire for each other, but also their yearning for a life unshackled by convention. Yet, the outside world continued to encroach. Gossip stirred quietly among the staff, and Mrs. Bolton's vigilance became more pronounced, her watchful eyes a constant reminder of the fragile nature of their secret. The manor itself, with its sprawling estate and rigid social structure, symbolized the barriers they faced, walls built not only of stone, but of deeply ingrained prejudice and expectation. The fear of exposure and the potential scandal it would bring cast a long shadow over their happiness. Connie's inner turmoil grew as she wrestled with the implications of their affair. She was painfully aware that to pursue this love openly would mean sacrificing her social standing, her family's approval, and the security that came with her class. Yet, the thought of abandoning Mellors, of returning to a loveless marriage and a life of emotional sterility, was unbearable. She felt caught between two worlds, each demanding loyalty, but offering only partial fulfillment. Mellors, too, struggled with these realities. His working-class background and the limited prospects it entailed were obstacles that could not be ignored. He feared that the gulf between their lives was too wide to bridge, that society would never accept their union. Yet, his love for Connie was steadfast, and he was willing to face whatever hardships lay ahead. Their relationship was an act of courage, a defiance of social norms that threatened to consume them. In this crucible of emotion and uncertainty, Connie and Mellors made a pact, a commitment not only to their love, but to the pursuit of freedom and authenticity. They recognized that their relationship was a challenge to the rigid class distinctions that governed their world, and in doing so, they became part of a larger struggle for change. Their love was revolutionary, a claim to the right to live and love on their own terms. As winter deepened, the landscape around Ragby Manor transformed into a stark and quiet realm, reflecting the solemnity of their situation. The bare trees and frosted fields seemed to echo the solitude and isolation they felt, even in each other's presence. Yet beneath this cold exterior, their passion burned brighter, a flame of hope and resilience. Connie's thoughts often drifted to the future, an uncertain horizon filled with both possibility and risk. She dreamed of a life where she could be free from the constraints of class and convention, where love was not hidden but celebrated. These dreams were tempered by the harsh realities she faced, but they gave her strength to endure. Mellors shared these visions, speaking candidly about his hopes for a life beyond the estate, where his worth would be recognized not for his occupation, but for who he was as a man. Their conversations about the future were tinged with both optimism and fear, revealing the complex interplay of desire and caution that defined their relationship. Their love, while deeply personal, was also shaped by the larger social and historical context of post-World War I England. The upheavals of the war had shaken the foundations of society, challenging traditional class structures and gender roles. Connie and Mellors' relationship was emblematic of these changes, a personal rebellion that echoed the broader transformations taking place. Despite the challenges, they found moments of joy and connection that reaffirmed their commitment. The simple pleasures of shared meals, walks in the countryside, and quiet evenings by the fire became acts of defiance against a world that sought to separate them. Their love was a sanctuary, a place where they could be fully themselves. Yet, the risk of discovery remained ever present. The fear of scandal and social ostracism cast a pall over their happiness. Connie was painfully aware that their relationship, if exposed, could destroy her reputation and everything she had known. The possibility of being forced to choose between love and security loomed large. In these moments of uncertainty, their bond was tested and strengthened. They leaned on each other for support, finding courage in their shared commitment. Their love was not without pain and sacrifice, but it was also a source of profound fulfillment and transformation. Connie's awakening continued on multiple levels: emotional, intellectual, and physical. She began to question the values and assumptions that had shaped her upbringing, seeking a deeper understanding of herself and her place in the world. Mellors' influence was central to this process, offering a perspective grounded in honesty and connection to the natural world. Their relationship became a catalyst for growth, challenging both to confront their limitations and aspirations. Connie's journey was one of self-discovery and emancipation, while Mellors grappled with the constraints imposed by his social position. Together, they forged a new path, one that defied convention and embraced the complexity of human experience. As winter gave way to the tentative signs of spring, their love endured, a testament to resilience and hope. The world around them remained harsh and unforgiving, but within their shared moments, they found a refuge, a space where love could flourish despite the odds. Their story was not just about passion, but about the human yearning for connection, freedom, and authenticity. It was a reminder that love could be a transformative force, capable of breaking down barriers and opening new possibilities. In their defiance and devotion, Connie and Mellors embodied the spirit of change, a challenge to the old order, and a celebration of life's enduring power. As the seasons turned again, Connie and Mellors found themselves at a crossroads that tested not only their love, but their very identities. The world outside Ragby Manor remained rigid and unyielding, its boundaries defined by class divisions and social expectations that refused to bend. Yet within the secluded spaces where their relationship had blossomed, a profound transformation was unfolding, not merely in their bond, but within themselves. Connie had grown from a woman confined by the rules of her class and upbringing into someone who sought to live authentically, embracing both the desires of her heart and the needs of her spirit. The journey had been difficult, fraught with doubts, guilt, and the constant tension between societal duty and personal fulfillment. Her relationship with Mellors was more than a clandestine affair. It was an awakening, a reclamation of her sense of self that had long been stifled by convention. Mellors, too, had undergone a profound change. His life, once limited by the rigid confines of working-class existence, had expanded through the love he shared with Connie. He was no longer merely the gamekeeper on a distant estate, but a man claiming his dignity and worth on his own terms. Their union challenged the social order, blurring the lines that separated master and servant, rich and poor, mind and body. The tension between these two worlds was the central conflict of their story, and it grew ever more intense as the possibility of discovery loomed closer. Connie's courage was tested as she contemplated the consequences of their relationship becoming known. The prospect of scandal, social ruin, and isolation pressed heavily on her. Yet the thought of abandoning Mellors or returning to a hollow existence was unbearable. Their love had, from the beginning, been an act of defiance, an assertion that human connection transcended the artificial barriers imposed by society. But as the stakes grew higher, they faced the hard realities of the outside world's resistance. Gossip and suspicion spread quietly through the manor and surrounding village, and the watchful eyes of those who disapproved threatened to unravel the fragile peace they had found. Connie's family, particularly her mother, embodied the entrenched attitudes that shaped the upper class's view of morality and propriety. The pressure to conform, to suppress desire and maintain appearances, was relentless. Yet Connie's heart and mind rebelled against these constraints, fueled by the vivid reality of her love with Mellors and the vitality it had awakened within her. In their stolen moments together, they spoke not only of love, but of freedom and possibility. They imagined a life beyond the boundaries of Ragby Manor and the suffocating roles assigned to them by birth. For Mellors, this meant envisioning a future where he was respected and valued beyond his station. For Connie, it was a longing to live fully and honestly, unburdened by the expectations that had weighed her down for so long. Their conversations revealed the depth of their commitment, but also the challenges they faced. The gulf between their worlds was not merely social, but psychological, shaped by years of conditioning and experience. Mellors, though proud and strong, carried the scars of a life limited by class, and Connie grappled with the remnants of guilt and fear that accompanied her rebellion. Amid these challenges, their love remained a source of strength and renewal. The physical connection that had first drawn them together was now intertwined with a profound emotional and spiritual bond. They had become each other's refuge and inspiration, proving that love could survive and flourish even in the harshest conditions. Connie's relationship with Clifford continued to evolve, marked by a complex mixture of pity, resentment, and resignation. Clifford's own struggles with physical disability and emotional isolation were mirrored in his relationship with Connie, underscoring the limitations of a marriage built on social expectation rather than passion. His eventual recognition of the reality of Connie's feelings, though painful, allowed a degree of understanding and acceptance that was bittersweet. The wider social context remained an oppressive force. The rigid class system and prevailing moral codes dictated behavior and reinforced separation. Yet the post-war era was also a time of gradual change, shifts in attitudes. The rise of new ideas about love, sex, and individuality began to erode old certainties. Connie and Mellors were both products and agents of this transition, embodying the tensions and possibilities of their time. Their story, while deeply personal, resonated with universal themes: the struggle for personal freedom, the challenge to societal norms, and the transformative power of love. Lawrence's narrative captured not just a forbidden romance, but a profound critique of the social structures that constrained human happiness and growth. In the quiet countryside, away from the judgment of society, Connie and Mellors created a space where they could explore these truths. Their love became a symbol of renewal, a call to embrace life's fullness despite the risks. The natural world around them, changing seasons, vibrant landscapes, and the rawness of physical labor mirrored their internal journey toward authenticity. As the novel draws toward its conclusion, the future remains uncertain. Connie and Mellors know that their path will not be easy or free from hardship. The social order may never fully accept their union, and personal sacrifices loom large. Yet their commitment to each other and to a life lived honestly provides a foundation for hope. Their story ends not with a neat resolution, but with the affirmation of love's enduring power to challenge, transform, and sustain. It is a call to embrace the complexities of human desire and connection, and to resist the forces that seek to diminish them. Lady Chatterley's Lover stands as a testament to the courage required to live authentically in the face of oppression and prejudice. It remains a powerful exploration of the intersections between class, gender, and sexuality, and a celebration of the human spirit's capacity for renewal. In the end, Connie and Mellors' love is not just a personal story, but a profound statement about the possibility of change, a hope that the rigid walls of society might one day give way to understanding, equality, and freedom. Their journey, fraught with pain and joy, struggle and triumph, leaves a lasting impression that love, in its deepest form, is a revolutionary act, one that demands courage, honesty, and the willingness to defy convention in pursuit of truth. And so, as the story closes, the reader is left with a lingering sense of possibility, an invitation to consider the power of love to transform not only individuals, but the very fabric of society itself. Through Connie and Mellors, Lawrence challenges us to look beyond appearances and prejudices, to embrace the fullness of life, and to recognize the profound human need for connection and authenticity. D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover remains one of the most provocative and enduring works of 20th century literature, not simply because of its explicit depiction of physical love, but because it confronts the deeper fractures within society, between classes, genders, and the divided human self. Through the story of Connie and Mellors, Lawrence explores the yearning for authentic connection in a world fractured by rigid social structures and emotional alienation. At its core, the novel is a bold statement about the necessity of reconciling the physical and emotional, the intellectual and instinctual parts of human nature. Lawrence challenges the conventions that had long dictated relationships and morality, exposing the hypocrisy and emptiness often lurking beneath polite society's surface. He insists that true fulfillment requires honesty with oneself and others, and courage to break free from oppressive traditions. The book's controversial history, banned for obscenity and scandalous at the time of publication, speaks to its power to unsettle and provoke thought. Yet beyond the initial shock lies a deeply human story about love's capacity to heal and transform, Connie's journey from repression to self-discovery, and Mellors' emergence as a man claiming his dignity highlight the novel's radical celebration of individuality and connection across social divides. Lady Chatterley's Lover challenges readers to reconsider their own beliefs about intimacy, class, and freedom. It is an invitation to acknowledge the complex interplay of desire and spirit that shapes who we are, and to recognize the cost of denying that fullness. In today's world, where conversations about identity, equality, and human connection continue to evolve, Lawrence's work remains strikingly relevant. It reminds us that love is not just a private matter, but a force with the power to confront injustice and reshape lives. The courage to seek authentic relationships, to embrace vulnerability, and to defy limiting conventions is a timeless lesson. As we close this journey through Lady Chatterley's Lover, we are left with a profound appreciation for Lawrence's vision, that the path to wholeness requires both rebellion and compassion, and that the greatest revolution may lie in opening our hearts to genuine connection. Thank you for joining this exploration of a novel that continues to challenge and inspire. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more immersive book summaries here on Reading Hours.